Welcome to my channel, The Untamed Savior. There's a specific kind of silence that only exists at 3 o'clock in the morning. It is not merely the absence of noise. It is something heavier, something with physical weight that presses down on the roof of the house and settles in the valley like a low-hanging fog. If you have lived on a ranch as long as I have, you learn to respect that silence. You learn to read it in the daylight. The land is loud with the machinery of living, the tractors, the wind and the drying hay, the calls of crows, the shifting of the herd. But at 3 a.m., the world feels paused, as if the earth itself is holding its breath, waiting for the sun to grant it permission to spin again. I have spent 20 years on a Blackwood ranch, and in that time I have memorized the nocturnal symphony of this old house. I know the precise groan the settling timber makes when the temperature drops below 40 degrees. I know the rhythmic scratching of the oak branch against the copper gutter on the west side. I know the sound of the house dog shifting on the rug, his tags jingling softly like wind chimes. These are the sounds of safety. They are the heartbeat of a home at rest. But on Tuesday night, exactly as the red digits on my bedside clock flipped from 2:59 to 3 o'clock, a sound tore through that heavy silence that did not belong. It was not the wind. It was not the settling house. It was the unmistakable, thunderous rhythm of a gallop. Hoofbeats, heavy, frantic, and pounding against the hard-packed earth. My eyes snapped open, staring up into the darkness of the ceiling. My brain struggling to catch up with my ears. If you know horses, you know that a gallop in the pitch black usually translates to only one thing: disaster. Horses are prey animals. They do not run in the dark for the joy of it. They run because they are terrified. They run because a fence is broken, or a predator is closing in, or the herd mentality has fractured into blind panic. A gallop at night is the sound of chaos. I threw off the heavy quilt, the cold air of the room hitting my skin like a slap. I fumbled in the dark for my boots, my fingers clumsy with sleep and adrenaline, jamming my feet into the stiff leather. My heart was hammering against my ribs, matching the rhythm of the hooves outside. Dush, dush, dush. The sound was close, too close. It felt like the vibration was coming up through the floorboards, shaking the very foundation of the farmhouse. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the nightstand and burst into the hallway, nearly colliding with Elias. Elias has been the caretaker of this land since before I owned it, a man carved out of rawhide and patience. He didn't say a word. He stood there in his flannel robe and unlaced work boots, gripping his own flashlight, his face pale in the wash of the beam. We didn't need to speak. We both knew the count. We had 12 horses in the main barn, 12 souls entrusted to our care. If one of them was out there running blind in the dark, they were running toward a broken leg, a twisted tendon, or a collision with a fence post that could end a life in seconds. Main barn, Elias whispered, his voice rough with sleep. Sounded like it came from the east paddock. We didn't walk. We ran. We burst out the back door, our light sweeping the yard in erratic, frantic arcs. The cold night air burned my lungs, tasting of damp earth and pine needles. "Hey!" Elias shouted, his voice cracking against the vastness of the dark. He was trying to break the panic, to let the horse know that humans were here, that help was coming. But as soon as our boots hit the dirt of the driveway, the galloping stopped. It didn't fade away into the distance. It didn't slow down to a trot and then a walk. It just ceased. Instantly, one moment, the air was filled with the violence of running hooves. The next, there was nothing but a howling of the wind and the sound of our own ragged breathing. It was the kind of silence that feels unnatural, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. We sprinted to the main barn, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle of the massive sliding door. I prepared myself for what I would find inside. I expected chaos. I expected to see an empty stall with a shattered latch. I expected to smell the acrid scent of sweat and fear. I expected to hear the high-pitched squeals of a herd in distress. I slid the door open, the metal rollers screaming in the quiet night, and we flooded the center aisle with light. But when the beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, we froze. The barn was peaceful. It was impossibly, serenely peaceful. The warm glow of the heat lamps cast long shadows across the straw, and the only sound was the soft, rhythmic crunching of hay. I walked to the first stall. Old Baron, our senior gelding, was fast asleep, flat out on his side in shavings, snoring softly with his lip twitching. He didn't even lift his head as we stormed in. I moved to the next. Luna, the mare who acts as a herd matriarch, was standing at the back of her stall, resting a hind leg, chewing lazily on a wisp of timothy grass. She blinked at me in the harsh light, her ears swiveling forward with mild curiosity, but no alarm. We went down the line, stall by stall. Check, check, check. 12 stalls, 12 horses, all accounted for, all secure. I placed my hand on the neck of a young quarter horse named Jack. His coat was dry, cool to the touch. There was no sweat. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. His heart rate was resting. If he had been the one galloping outside just moments ago, his skin would be hot, his flanks heaving, his eyes wide with adrenaline. But he was calm. They were all calm. Elias checked the locks on the tack room and the rear exit. Both were bolted tight from the inside. He looked at me, then back at the sleeping herd, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "You heard it," he whispered. It wasn't a question. He needed validation that he hadn't lost his mind. "I heard it," I said, my voice low. It sounded like 1,000 pounds of muscle striking the earth. It was right outside the door, Elias. We stood there in the warm, hay-scented air of the barn, trying to make sense of insanity. You don't imagine a sound like that. You feel it gallop in the soles of your feet. We knew the difference between a deer sprinting and a horse running. A deer bounds. The rhythm is lighter, broken. An elk is heavy, but they move through the brush with a crashing sound. This was a distinct 4-beat rhythm of a horse on flat ground. And yet, every horse we owned was locked safely inside. "Something is out there," Elias said, turning back toward the open barn door. "And it's not ours." We stepped back out into the night. The logical part of my brain tried to construct a rational explanation, searching for an excuse to go back to bed. Maybe it was an echo. Maybe a neighbor's horse had gotten loose. But the nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the canyon. If a horse had traveled that far, it would be exhausted, confused, and likely injured. Elias pointed his flashlight at the ground near the water trough, about 20 feet from the barn entrance. "Sam," he said, his voice tight, "look." I followed the beam of light to the mud. It had rained earlier that evening, softening the ground into a dark, malleable clay. And there, cut deep into the earth, were fresh tracks. The edges were sharp, not yet eroded by the wind or gravity. They were proof. We weren't crazy. But as I knelt to inspect them, a cold knot formed in my stomach. They didn't belong to a full-grown horse. They were small, too small for a draft, too delicate for a working quarter horse. They were the size of a teacup saucer, and the pattern was erratic. They weren't running in a straight line. They were pacing, back and forth, like something was patrolling the perimeter of the barn, desperate to find a way in. The tracks led away from the barn, disappearing into the tall, wet grass toward the north fence line, the boundary between our manicured safety and the deep, untamed woods that bordered the property. We had a choice in that moment. We could go back inside, lock the doors, tell ourselves it was a stray passing through, and wait for the clarity of the morning sun. But if you work with animals, you know you cannot do that. You cannot sleep when you know there is a heartbeat out in the dark that doesn't have a protector. Because if there's a horse out there, alone in the dark, it is prey. And as if on cue, the coyotes began to sing from the ridge line, a chorus of high-pitched yips and howls that sent a shiver down my spine. "Grab your jacket," I said to Elias. "We're going walking." We move away from the safety of the barn lights, stepping into the true dark. The darkness out here is oppressive. It feels thick, like you are wading through black water. Every shadow looks like a flank. Every rustle of leaves sounds like a breath. We walked in silence, scanning the ground, following the intermittent trail of small hoof prints where the grass had been crushed flat. We reached the north pasture, about a half-mile from the house. This is where the land gets rough. The smooth pasture grass gives way to scrub brush, rocky outcroppings, and thickets of blackberry brambles. The fog was rolling in now, catching the beams of our flashlights and scattering the light, making it hard to see more than 10 feet ahead. And then we heard it again. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't a gallop this time. It was a trot, anxious, high-stepping. It was a sound an animal that is alert, wired with fear, dancing on the edge of flight. "Kill the light," I whispered to Elias. We plunged ourselves into darkness, letting our eyes adjust to the gloom. We needed to hear where it was coming from without spooking it further. We stood perfectly still, listening to the wind hiss through the barbed wire fence. The trotting stopped. Then a sniff, a loud, sharp inhalation of air. It was close, maybe 50 yards out. "Hello," I called out softly. My voice sounded incredibly small in the vastness of the valley. Silence. I lowered my flashlight, pointing at the ground so the beam was diffused, a soft pool of light rather than a weaponized glare. I took a step forward. "Easy now," I murmured. I slipped into the hoarse voice. It is a tone every rancher learns eventually. It is low, rhythmic, vibrating deep in chest. It is a sound meant to mimic the low hum of a herd at rest. "It's okay. You're okay. We aren't going to hurt you." Then a sound tore the night apart. It wasn't the deep, resonant roar of a stallion. It wasn't the warning squeal of a mare. It was a cry, high-pitched, trembling, broken. A foal. My stomach dropped as the realization hit me. A baby. Out here? Alone? There are no wild herds in this valley. If there was a foal, logic dictated there had to be a mother nearby. A mare would never leave her foal unless she was dead or trapped. We swung our lights frantically, searching the tree line for the larger reflection of a mare's eyes, scanning the gully for a down horse. We saw nothing. The woods were empty. There, Elias hissed, grabbing my arm. He pointed his light toward the fence line. There, reflecting the beam in the distance, were two small dots, green gold orbs glowing in the void. Eyes! He was a ghost in the fog. As we moved closer, the silhouette sharpened. A foal, standing on the wrong side of the barbed wire. He looked ragged. Even from this distance, I could see the steam rising from his coat. He had been running for a long time. He was soaking wet, sweat and dew mixed with mud caked on his legs. He approached the fence, his little head bobbing, then darted back toward the trees. Then he turned and ran back to the wire. He was trapped in a loop of fear. He could smell the horses in our barn. He could smell the hay, the water, the safety of the herd. He was desperate to reach that warmth, but the fence and the two strange humans standing by it stood in his way. And behind him, the woods were getting darker and the coyote calls were getting closer. Elias looked at me, his face grim. "We can't leave him, Sam. Not with the pack hunting tonight. He won't last an hour." He was right. If we walked away, nature would take its course, and it would be violent and quick. But a panic horse is dangerous. A panicked foal is a live wire of erratic energy. If we try to grab him, if we move too fast, he would bolt. And if he bolted now, blind with fear, he'd run straight into the ravine or tangle himself in the brush. We had to be still. We had to be quieter than the night itself. We had to convince a terrified animal that we were safer than the solitude of the woods. "Sit down," I said. "In the mud." Elias asked. "In the mud," I replied. "Get low. Make yourself small." I sat down in the wet grass, crossing my legs, ignoring the dampness soaking into my jeans. Elias sat a few feet away. I turned off my flashlight completely. We sat in the moonlight, illuminated only by the breaks in the cloud cover. I needed him to know I wasn't a predator. Predators stalk. Predators stand tall. Predators stare. Friends sit. Friends wait. "I'm just going to sit here," I whispered to the darkness. "Take your time, little one." Minutes dragged by. 5, 10, 15. The cold was seeping into my bones, making my teeth ache. But I didn't move. I barely breathed. I listened to his breathing. It was jagged, shallow, like a bellows working too hard. Then a shift. I heard a hoof squelch in the mud. Then another. He was moving closer. I heard a long, deep inhalation. He was processing my scent. He was smelling the hay on my jacket, the horse feed dust on my boots, the soap on my skin. He was analyzing the chemical signature of my intentions. He was smelling home. He stepped into a patch of moonlight, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. He was a mess. A dark bay, maybe 5 or 6 months old. His ribs were showing like the rungs of a ladder beneath a dull, staring coat. His mane was a hopeless tangle of burrs and briars. He looked at me, his eyes wide, rolling slightly with the whites showing. He was deciding. It is the most fragile moment in nature. The moment a wild thing decides to bridge the gap, the moment flight turns into curiosity. He reached his neck over the rusted wire, stretching as far as he could. I didn't reach for him. I let him reach for me. That is the rule. You never take. You only receive. His velvet nose brushed my knuckles. He was burning up with exhaustion. He let out a long, shuddering breath, blowing warm, moist air into my palm. I slowly turned my hand over, scratching him gently under the jaw, right where I know they hold their tension. And just like that, the panic broke. His head lowered. His ears flopped out to the sides. He was done running. He was just tired, so incredibly tired. "We need to get him through the fence," I whispered to Elias. "We don't have a halter." "Don't need one," Elias said softly. He slowly stood up, moving with the fluidity of a man who has spent 70 years around animals. He took a pair of pliers from his belt. We didn't have a gate at this section of the pasture. We had to make one. Elias clamped the pliers onto the wire. Snip! The sound was loud in the quiet night, and the foal flinched, pulling back. But he didn't run. He watched us. He seemed to understand that we were altering the world for him. Elias cut the second wire, then the third, folding the sharp edges back to create a gap wide enough for a body to pass through. "Come on, son," Elias whispered, stepping back. There was no forcing him. He had to choose to cross the line. The foal looked back at the woods, the dark, cold unknown where he'd come from, the place that had terrified him but also hidden him. Then he looked at the gap in the wire. Then he looked at us. He took one tentative step, then another, and he stepped through. The walk back to the barn was surreal. We didn't drag him. We didn't chase him. He followed us. He glued himself to my shoulder, his hoofbeats falling into rhythm with my boots. He pressed his body against my arm as we walked, seeking the physical reassurance of another living being. He knew where we were going. He could hear the other horses now, shifting in their stalls. The 3 a.m. mystery wasn't a monster. It wasn't a threat. It was an orphan knocking on the door. When we slid the barn door open again, the atmosphere inside changed. Usually, strange horses are met with aggression, squeals, stomping, the assertion of dominance from the established herd. But not this time. As we walked the shivering foal down the center aisle, a low, guttural nicker rippled through the barn. It is a specific sound, deep in the throat, soft and vibrating. It is the sound mares make to their foals. It is a sound of location. I am here. You are safe. Luna, our oldest mare, put her head over the stall door. She didn't pin her ears. She didn't bare her teeth. She reached out, her nostrils flaring. The foal froze. He was shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. We guided him into the empty quarantine stall next to Luna. We gave him fresh water, warm bran mash, and a mountain of deep, soft straw. He drank the bucket dry in seconds, the water sloshing as he gulped. But he didn't care about the food as much as he cared about the mare next door. He went to the bars separating their stalls. Luna lowered her nose to the gaps. The foal stretched up. They breathed into each other's nostrils, sharing the air, exchanging scents, establishing a bond in the silent language of their species. A silent adoption took place in that aisle. I watched the tension melt away from the foal's frame. His head dropped lower. His eyelids grew heavy. The adrenaline crash was finally hitting him. At 4:15 a.m., the foal curled his long, knobby legs underneath him and collapsed into straw. He didn't just sleep. He passed out, a deep, dreamless slumber born of total exhaustion and total safety. Elias and I stood there for a long time, leaning on the wood of the stall door, watching his flank rise and fall. We never found out where he came from. No neighbors claimed him. We checked the brand inspection records. Nothing matched. No trailer had passed by on the main road. It was as if the woods had simply spat him out, knowing he couldn't survive another night alone. We named him Shadow, for the way he appeared out of the mist and darkness. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was nothing short of a miracle. The ribs disappeared, buried under a layer of healthy muscle. The dull coat shed out, revealing a slick, copper shine that gleamed in the sun. But the best part was watching him find his place. He wasn't a frightened stray pacing the fence line anymore. He was part of the herd. He ran in the fields with Luna, mimicking her movements, learning how to be a horse, learning that he belonged. Sometimes, late at night, I stand on the porch and listen to the silence of the valley. I think about that night. I think about what would have happened if we had just pulled the covers up, if we had convinced ourselves that the noise was just the wind, if we had chosen comfort over curiosity. It is easy to ignore the things that scare us. It is easy to stay in the light when the darkness is knocking. But sometimes, the thing that goes bump in the night isn't there to hurt you. Sometimes, the disturbance in your peace is not a threat, but a plea. Sometimes, it is just a lost soul walking perimeter of your life, waiting for someone to simply listen. We keep the gate a little easier to open these days. We keep the flashlights by the door with fresh batteries, because you never know who might be out there, standing in the fog, waiting for the kindness of strangers to turn the terrifying dark into a way home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and remember to keep your eyes open. You never know who needs you to be their light in the dark.